So maybe we can take
Comments.
some questions for Richard.
Yeah, comments.
Quite a provocative set of ideas, and I think a very interesting solution. So, Chris Pissarides, maybe you can
Chris, yeah.
start.
I can start it together.
Do we have a microphone?
I'm just going to turn this down. I don't know if that, I just listen so I can take notes.
Well, I think, thank you very much, Richard. I agree with practically everything you said. In fact, I even have one or two good examples on your labor robot substitution, which I think is a very good thought. I haven't quite formulated it that way, but as you know, we had Brexit in the UK.
Yeah.
And the Financial Times, like most thinking people in the UK, was against Brexit, is against Brexit. So they always find things to talk about, the implications. And one of the implications is that most of the agricultural labor in the UK was done by cheap Romanian and Bulgarian and Polish labor, which presumably now will not be available. So they had a strawberry farmer saying that he's going to introduce robots in his farm. And then they asked him what the robots would be doing, and he said the robots would be taking the empty baskets from the warehouse to the strawberry pickers, and then when the basket is full, they will take the full basket back to the warehouse. Because he was saying, I would never trust a robot to pick a strawberry. and I think it brings it to the main point that I wanted to make, that, I mean, this is a recent article in the Financial Times, very interesting, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It brings to the main point I wanted to say, though, that that I felt you didn't emphasize well enough in your talk, is that there are many, many jobs in the service sector, especially, that humans could do that at least within a generation, I don't see robots doing them. And in fact, as an aside, you mentioned FDR. Roosevelt is one of the very first people to mention this problem of automation in the world. Of course, Keynes predicted it before, probably in 1933. He said that automation and machines will take over the jobs of our grandchildren, and if we want them to be employed, they will probably have to work 15 hours a week only because of that. The rest should be taken as leisure. Now, if you think about it, I mean, look at sectors where employment's been increasing very rapidly, especially health and care and that kind of thing. Especially in the United States, actually. I mean, to use. I mean, I have 2 recent examples from people very close to me. When my colleague and friend Dale Mortensen was sick, terminally ill, they stopped treatment, but then you had something like 3, 4, 5 nurses giving him what do you call it, the hospice treatment, as you know. That's part of the care. Yeah. My mother, I was the same situation, and I just cannot imagine a robot dealing with, my mother in her 90s when she couldn't understand many things going on around her. That kind of service would create jobs. Now, the issue there is the inequality, of course. How do you compensate these people well enough?
That's right.
But in the States, you discovered a very good way of paying these care people extremely high wages. The medical, because your medical costs, of course, are way above
crazy, yeah.
everywhere. And there are many service sectors that I believe could take over. But if I go back to what Keynes was saying, of course, there is some evidence that what he was saying is correct, that the country with the lowest hours of work per employee in Europe, you probably know which one it is, but I'm sure most people would not, Germany. And the country with the longest hours of work in Europe, that even you may not know that one, is Greece.
Oh.
So the Greeks are the hardest working, and the Germans the laziest people in Europe. and of course, if you look also at how much capital they're using in automation, Germany is number 1, and Greece is probably the last one, along with Romania, Bulgaria, and those other countries.
Yes, we have comparative advantage in some things, and we'll have, for as far as you or I can see, there may be robots social robots that do some things in the future. But those people have to be well paid, and if we're going to have a reasonable income distribution, otherwise it ends up the system where there's like lords of the manor, and everybody are the serfs to the lords, and the lords are now would be owning the technologies, and the rest of us are running around. So it is an income distribution question, whether this is going to be a great boon for us, or whether it's going to be a real pain and a transition that will be dangerous and harmful for people. Just on the agriculture comment, the Science magazine, about 3 issues ago, had a big article on robotization of agriculture. And that's where they were saying the strawberries would have special sensors. This is now experiments in labs of scientists. Special things on them that would announce when they are ripe. And then you would have one of these soft robot things that wouldn't break anything of the white sides kind. And the most interesting part of their article, which I don't know if it's true, and they don't know either, but a couple of people said, this means we could do away with big farms. That an individual farmer who would have these robot helpers, you wouldn't need the giant economies of scale that you would do. And that was where the farmer was owning the technology. It doesn't necessarily help the robot picking person who might have lost the job, which with the strawberry picking person, who would do the job. And I hadn't really thought about agriculture much at all till I saw this article. And then you think about what they do. It is the full a farmer does the full spectrum of sort of human work. There's routine work, there's judgment work, there's this kind of work, and then there's financial work. You got to know when to bring things to market and which market to bring it to, and . If this article was right, that the robotics could improve the individual farmer's ability to deal, I thought that would be really very, very, very good. Although the Brits might regret losing the Romanian and other peoples. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, here in the middle.
Yeah. Hi, thanks. My name is Keegan Elmer. I work at China Labor Bulletin.
Yes, I know you guys.
Yeah. It's a very interesting talk. Thanks. I have 3 simple things I wanted to address here. One is the role of governments in robotization, mechanization of production. And 2 is overcapacity in robotics, actually. And 3 is about social unrest. I actually run the China Labor Bulletin strike map, which is about worker unrest. And just to finish that point first, we haven't seen any worker unrest directly about automation, smashing of machines, and this sort of thing. No Luddite-based strikes and protests. Yeah.
No, I don't think that's anywhere in the world, and I don't think people are smarter than wanting to go against a big robot.
And it may manifest in other ways actually in China on our strike map, but that's something we can get into later. But one, I actually wanted to just raise an article that I read a little while ago in the finance section of the ACFTU, the Chinese trade union website, was about warnings about overcapacity in robot production, actually. So this is, they quoted a business person saying something like, in 5 or 10 years' time, if we still have 1 out of every 5 robot producers left on the market, that would be a good thing for our industry because they saw so much in overproduction. One of the reasons is because of one of the things I wanted to get back to is the role of governments in automation is actually quite huge. It's something that I wondered if you might speak to, because I didn't see it in your presentation much. But one is, for example, subsidies. You mentioned Hangzhou as a city that had major subsidies for automation, but that's actually pretty common, I think, through China in terms of encouraging people to relocate and to automate production. There's a huge amount of subsidies. It's difficult to calculate on local levels, encouraging this. And actually, in terms of overcapacity, there's overcapacity in the robotics industry. There's been massive growth, partially fueled by government research and development, but also private research and development, and that may not be landing in factories in the end. So I wonder if you might address those points, just the role of governments and overcapacity.
Okay, yeah. for the role of government is extremely important. Because government is ultimately funding a lot of the robotics technology. In the U.S., it would be the Defense Department has been major pushing in different kinds of robotics things, and then it goes off to the private sector. The Defense Department played a big role in the development of the internet. There were some British folks I know who also played a big part. The China government, they are doing subsidies for robotics. That is correct. No, the Hangzhou, actually, that was not, I don't know what the Hangzhou government was doing. That story did not say that government was pushing it. So I know some other cities, but you're basically right. And I think that's a strange policy. It's going to happen without government pushing, and it's going to benefit, as it's developing now, it benefits wealthier people at the expense of poorer people. And that seems in a time when income inequality is huge in this country and big throughout the world, for governments to go and push further on that seems to me very strange policy. But as these the American Revolution folks said very sharply, I didn't bring a full spectrum of what they had to say because it seemed not appropriate here, but there was a general belief that whenever the wealthy people got a lot ahead of everybody, they would buy the government, and the government would respond to that. And yeah, and then there's that. James Madison was all worked up about this, that he thought you just couldn't have a democracy in the end because this would happen. I'm very dubious of this overcapacity phenomenon. I mean, every time you have a boom in some industry, of course, many people go into the industry, many fail. And I don't think there's anything special here. If those robotic federation, the forecasts, or whatever you want to call them, projections, are remotely true, this is not an industry you should be worrying a whole lot about overcapacity. The industry you might want to be worrying about, housing booms and busts. Robotics boom and bust is not going to, and if it occurs, it's part of capitalism, I think, is you try with your company, I try with mine, one of us makes it, the other fails, and it's a good way to run a society, as long as if my company fails, I don't starve in the streets. And the kind of people who are building these robotics companies, they're university graduates, they're smart, they will end up someplace. We had the .com thing, and I had graduate students leaving economics to form .com companies, and then 3 years later, they came back to finish their PhDs and become professors. So that's fine in my reading of that. And I use your strike data, so it's very useful. So I'll say that.
Okay, now the hands are really going up. Okay, let's, maybe we can take a few questions together and then have Richard respond to the ones he wants to do. There was one, okay, one right here in the green shirt, and then in the back, and then here, and then here. If you can just say your name and where you're from.
Pablo, I also work for CLB, and I would like to follow up on when you mentioned on the robot tax and universal income. Could you expand, could you elaborate on why you think these are not better solutions than, let's say, ownership? And how do you address the prohibitive cost of robotics? For example, the blue-collar workers that the robots are going to replace, or actually they are replacing.
Hi, Professor. Adam Lee from Hong Kong Design Center. When we do cultivate design thinking, we're talking a lot about deployment of framing challenges or how to deploy technology to solve problems. It could be mobility, it could be health, it could be a lot of things. And instead of just worrying about that the robots one day can come up and dominate, and change our life, what can actually be done, or check and balance can be put in place, to create a harmony. Because design is for people, we need to have this kind of humanizing and empathy, still there. And we're not talking about, really, we're talking about robots dominating us. So what can we do, to reduce that specter, from happening?
Hi, Richard. My name is Alvin. I do private equity venture capital investing. So I have portfolio in the robot space. In your picture or in your presentation, there's a picture. The picture is pretty gloomy for workers or labor. My question is, would it be possible that there's an problem or measurement error in terms of the new jobs being created over years? Where I have friends who does yoga teaching, they're doing well. Chef, for example, people who own restaurants, they're building bigger business, and people like that. And these are, they're doing fine as far as I can tell. We as a financial investors are having trouble. Hedge fund is not performing. These people, quote unquote ordinary people, they're doing fine. So would it be something that you can comment about? And well, I think I'll leave time for other people.
Hi, Professor. This is MK from Legacy Academy. We know that technological singularity talks about how technology actually get faster and faster in terms of sort of going faster and faster. However, human being, including the institution of government, they are more linear by nature. We know how slow things are. Yeah, in Hong Kong we are talking about Uber, but it's very far away from making the law or legislation. And then there will be automation or autonomous cars. Now, how can people, we are talking about this generation of young people, can adapt to the changing environment, which is so fast, which is getting faster and faster, accelerating. And what kind of the role that the government can actually play when they are so slow in responding?
So I want to share one observation that was made to me. Do you know what occupation in the U.S. has increased faster than any other occupation category?
No, what is it?
Other.
Other. I see.
Which means that there was no category before.
To put them in.
Yeah, so that there's a lot of new types of jobs that get created as technology changes.
Yeah.
Just to maybe challenge the notion that there won't be new jobs that emerge even in the context of new technologies.
Yeah.
So why don't you just respond selectively as you like.
Okay. What's wrong with a robot tax is it's like the Piketty plan for the tax on capital around the world. That capital will just go to where there's no robot tax. And then if robots are efficient and et cetera, and we have to appreciate, yes, they are potentially making us more in control of the environment and the better. I'm not against them anyway. And so you would never be able to do it. If you put it in the US, the robot guys would be making stuff in Canada. And if you started to tell companies that they had to pay a tax to bring in a machine, then they would shift the operations to some other country where they don't pay the tax for the machine. It just doesn't add up as a viable solution. The universal benefits. We do that in the U.S. I don't know what your scheme is here. Social Security is largely a universal benefit. It is the most successful. Costs almost nothing in terms of the administrative costs, unlike the U.S. health insurance system, which has dozens of different players taking off part of it. And that is a possible thing. Many of the companies that I talk to, they're much more attuned. If we give more of our income, profit sharing, or ownership to our workers? Well, that's what Google does. That's what, you go through all the list of successful high-tech companies and many others. It actually increases the worker's attachment and raises productivity. You're paying for the person to try hard to make the company do well. And that is more attractive to a lot of people than always got to say for your universal benefit, who are you taxing to pay for it? And we have the universal benefit in the state of Alaska. And because based upon the natural resource that you could think of as like a knowledge resource of technology, the state of Alaska takes the money, and so does the country of Norway, puts it into a big fund, and the citizens were getting, for no work, for nothing, until last year when the governor, some political shenanigans, cut the amount of money. But they were getting basically $2,000 for every person. So if you were a family with 4 people, you got $8,000 from the government as part of your income. That seems to be very good, but that means you've got to have some big fund out there doing something. And you have to have this natural resource thing. And then there was a governor, the most recent governor, who he wanted to use the money for something else. And he managed, under whatever the laws were, to cut it in half. So last year it was only 1,000. The Norwegians, who also have this kind of thing, it was very, they had some big debates. At one point, the conservatives wanted to cut checks to people, and the more conservative, which turned out was the Socialist Party, wanted to use it for healthcare things, as opposed to just cutting checks every year. So it becomes a political business. I just think ownership gives everybody a sense of, I'm not dependent on the government either. I have my ownership. And the government might have helped me get it, which was the history of the US, was the government would be selling off land, huge amounts of land to normal people. The Homestead Act, which was Abe Lincoln's phenomenon. And I think the biggest mistake the US made after the Civil War, there was a bill in Congress to basically sell land to the freed slaves at low prices and whatever it would be. And then you would have created a very different kind of South in the US. So I think it's better. On the design question, I think the robots and artificial intelligence can do extraordinary positive things for making our environment better. And that's why I gave the example of the construction, this 3D printing house and so on. Because I think you can make that more personalized. People can choose much more individualistic things that they want. And one of the bad developments in the mainland China is in the construction sector, where some very large companies build the huge apartment blocks, exactly the same design, city after city after city. And you go to city after city after city, and it is not a pleasant sort of urban environment. And I think these technologies would allow for much more individualistic, so every city doesn't start to look like every other city, et cetera. So urban areas can look great, and they can look just, et cetera. The job measurement phenomenon. What has happened in the U.S., and it's true in most countries, but I know the U.S. best, is some people have done very well, and other people have not. So the income distribution has been spreading. Part of the spread is that people who would do better with their own companies or with their own things are doing fine. Part of the spread, though, is people who are unable to succeed. So 5 of your friends started a restaurant. 1 of them will succeed, and 4 will not. It's restaurants. That's probably the turnover is even worse. The likelihood that you succeed, and and so what's happened in the income distribution is it becomes more polarized. The inequality is not just the super rich getting more and more. It's that more people are in the upper parts of the income distribution, and more people are in the lower parts. And so people are really worried about the hollowing out of the middle as being a phenomenon. And that does not look socially desirable. Now I've got I lost the last comment. I'm sorry. I have my notes here and I forgot what you said.
Repeat your last question.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was saying that when the technological singularity, so-called,
Oh, okay, got it.
is the acceleration.
Yep.
Yeah, that part.
I should have put singularity and I would have remembered. Well, I mean, so far the technology turns is maybe is singular, but for us to bring it to our companies and to bring it to our cities, that is much slower. It isn't that it's changing so incredibly fast. What I think for young people should be everybody should be learning to speak a particular language, and it's not Mandarin, it's not English, it's computer code. And that is will be the universal language, and that will prepare young people. And of course, many of them, they are much more adept than older people at dealing with all kinds of changing stuffs. So I think they can see this themselves, and they see it in their lives. I would, in the universities, the University of Illinois is switching from having normal college majors to every major is to be joint with computer science. And I think that is a great idea because it's basically saying, the way many countries, you have to do English because that's the language of science and whatever, so on. But if I had a choice between English and computerese, right now I would probably go with English. But I think for the future it's going to be that computerese it's so important to be able to talk to and not be afraid of the technology, to understand what its promises and negatives are. And that'll lead everybody to make better use of it. Because it is ultimately the Keynes kind of point that Chris said. It's ultimately greater productivity, and we don't all have to be like Alfred E. Newman and partying every night with whatever it is, but we will have much more choices in leisure. But that also is, let me be clear, that's also far away. There's all kinds there are many poor people in China that need to be, there's a whole lot of work for everybody to do, I think, until we reach the Keynes's day of 15 hours and drink tea in Bloomsbury. I did have one person drinking tea in Bloomsbury there for that reason. Yeah. No, it wasn't. I mean, it may have been an actor playing Oscar Wilde. I just pulled a picture from some website that said, "Oh, that's a great picture of somebody doing the Keynes kind of a phenomenon." Okay, thanks.
So unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to close the event here, but I'd like to really thank Richard for a very stimulating.
Okay, well, thanks.